starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Salaam Alaikum. Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies.
Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu rasulullah wa ba'd. In the name of Allah, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon His last and final messenger. As to what follows, family, friends, foes, haters, and hateettes, welcome back to the Feachaz. I greet you all in peace and love and no hatred in my heart. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before we begin, please like, please subscribe, and please share. As you know, we got a lot of haters up in here. And family, the state of the descendants of slavery is such that right now, in this point of time in history, we're considered a permanent underclass with regards to the status quo system. And after facing, over almost 400 years of slavery, 375 years of slavery, almost 100 years of Jim Crow, almost a half a century of benign neglect. And now we reach the point of political indifference in where immigration is being tooled up to permanently disenfranchise black folk rather, in the what we call democracy, this system that we call democracy. And we have not only been neglected by the powers that shouldn't be, right? However, we've been neglected also by the wider immigrant community, and of course, as you know, our history is is a history of infiltration, of interruption, and nobody want to leave us alone. They just don't want to leave us alone, right? that's just a fact. Okay. So when we started this journey here on the Feachaz, we made it a point to deal with a black issue specifically, right? From Muslims, right? From Muslims directly, right? Because every single time you talk about black issues among the wider Muslim society, they want to tell you, oh, there's no racism in Islam, and oh, we're all brothers and all that stuff, right? Meanwhile, they're taking care of their own issues specifically. So a while back, a brother of mine shared with me an imam, an incredible imam, right, that I never heard of before. His name is Rashad Abdul-Rahman. And this young brother, he is like, he's just a breath of fresh air. I really, really appreciate the work that he's doing on his channel. He's way more articulate than me. He's a way better YouTuber than I am, right? And I strongly suggest that y'all, family, check out his channel and make sure you share this podcast. This one's going to be fire, as usual. We only do fire here, right? And without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed guest, Brother Imam Rashid Abdul-Rahman. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are things? How are things? How are things?
Alhamdulillah. Things are good. How are you, my brother?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. I'm so happy that you're able to make it today, and I'm very honored that you graced us with your presence, and I'm really, really looking forward to this podcast. Right. So before we get into it, I found out about you on the random, right? And I started watching your videos, like just binge watching all the time, like every single time you put out something, I watched it, right? So before we get into it, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, because you're not a convert, right? You're a born Muslim, right?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, Sheikh.
Well, Bismillah. I want to start by thank you for having me on here. You were one of the first persons that reached out to me. I guess other persons that have a channel on
Mhm.
YouTube, you reached out to me and gave me your words of support, and we've been in contact to some degree since then, and I thank you for the work that you've been doing. Um,
Jazakallah khair.
my history, my parents. I'm sure. I mean, you started off with the brother Malcolm, Minister Malcolm. May Allah forgive him his sins and grant him paradise. Hajj Malik Shabazz, he was opening for a meeting. That's the history. To put it in a
Mhm.
nutshell, that I come from. Both of my parents were in the Nation of Islam, and um, I come from the community of people who were in the Nation of Islam and made the transition under Imam W.D. Muhammad in 1975.
Mhm.
So myself, my siblings, we were all just born and raised in what was the Nation of Islam. I think by that time it was like the World Community of Al Islam in the West. The name was changed basically. And that period of time was known or is known historically as the quote unquote transition, where we were transitioning out of that old system of beliefs. And, perhaps we can talk about that later, but that's because that's a totally another, that takes us in another direction.
Yeah.
Um, but those of us who were situated to grow up in the community, a handful of us were also situated to learn the religion from sort of a classical perspective, uh, meaning that a part of the work of transitioning the community was situating the younger members to have access to sources of traditional Islamic knowledge. So I grew up south side of Chicago, Muslim family. I mean, it's nothing too eventful. But around the age of 19, I decided to take the religion seriously, so to speak. I mean, I'm born and raised Muslim, so we don't eat pork, all of those sort of cliche things.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but, but at the same time, um, we are uh, I'm coming into young adulthood or manhood, and I want to know what the religion is all about. At that time, Imam Muhammad was actually conducting a class himself in tafsir,
That's
Quranic Arabic.
Imam Wahdi Muhammad, right?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yes. Mhm.
Who was the leader of the community up until his passing. So, what most people tend to confuse is that the Nation of Islam, under the leadership of Minister Farrakhan, is not. It's a reiteration of something that was
Yeah. Yeah.
already changed. Uh,
Yes.
so we had that opportunity to do that. So I studied under him for 5 years, maybe
Mhm.
4 or 5 years. And again, this was primarily tafsir, recitation of Quran, as well as Quranic Arabic, like the grammar, Quranic linguistics, some even call it now. And from there, I continued studies in comparative religion at a college level, comparative religion philosophy. And then that's when I moved to Milwaukee. So after he passed away, I actually moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin to work for the Muslim school. I was the assistant imam and assistant director of education for what we have in our community. We call it the Clara Muhammad School System. It's a loose organization of schools that was founded by the members of the Nation of Islam that also made the transition. So during the Nation of Islam days, it was called the University of Islam. After the
Mhm.
transition, it became known as Clara Muhammad School. A lot of them have closed down, but in Milwaukee is one of the cities that still has one. So I went there to work for about 5 years.
Mhm.
And during that time, I was majoring in philosophy and religious studies at the university. Then I was invited to become the assistant imam here in Atlanta, Georgia. So that's what I did. I moved out and became the assistant imam here. And then I continued studies in several places. Medina Institute, for example, which is located here
Mashallah.
under Sheikh Mohammed Ninoui, along with the faculty. It's a lot. We have they have really a visiting faculty
Mhm.
that engages in usuluddin. And the way he did it, he designed the program to really cram about 3 to 4 years of a typical Islamic studies program across the globe into 1 year, and then you do
Mhm.
continuing studies. Um, then I continued to study. Even now, I'm doing hadith science pursuing the Ijaz and Hadith sciences under Sheikh Katani out of Morocco, Uthman Khan, who's in Canada, through his program, Qira'at, Tajweed with him as well, but also with one of the brothers here who has I've read with him. He has a program, Measured Tones Institute. He studied around the world. His name is slipping me right now, but Measured Tones Institute is the place. And then a couple other imams and teachers I've studied Islamic sciences under in a very general way. Right now, upon that basis, we've started our own institute. So I'm completing certain ijazas for the sake of being able to give them. We wanted an institute to be accredited. So I had studied grammar, for example, for years. But I'm actually in the middle of a program just to receive a certification to give. So I did grammar with local people. I did it in college. I did it on my own. I mean, I really had about 20 years of as an example. But I was always doing it for just the love. But I realized, the Black Muslim community, we really don't have established centers of Islamic learning. So I had to really put myself back in school, so to speak, just to get certain credits to give to students. So that's it. I'm still at the Atlanta Masjid. We're considered to be the largest African-American Muslim community. That's not Imam Muhammad's community. That's all, I guess, all Black Muslims, as they say. It's a very influential masjid. And the work there is, it has its own nature. Anytime you're working for an African-American community, it has its own unique set of characteristics and challenges. So that's where I am. I don't plan to be a career imam. You know what I mean? My primary interest is in education. So that's sort of where I am at the moment.
Now, I just want to take you back a little bit because you mentioned some very important things about, first of all, the Nation of Islam and Brother Malcolm. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the Nation of Islam, even at the time of Malcolm X, rahimahullah, it had its transitions, right? It had its changes. And since Louis Farrakhan, he took over the Nation of Islam, what he basically restarted the Nation of Islam, right? But it wasn't the same Nation of Islam as Elijah Muhammad, even when he restarted it, right? And even throughout his lifetime, you could say there was like even 3 major transitions in terms of the way that he puts out his lectures and his information and whatnot, right? So we had his pre-1994 transition where he was, basically saying the white man's the devil, all that kind of stuff. And then after 1994, he ordered all his ministers to stop using that language. We're not going to call the white man the devil anymore in the lectures and whatnot. And he hasn't done that since 1994, right? And that's the second. And then he had his third transition after his, when he got poisoned by the the Mossad or whatever, right? And then he started getting really into the Scientology stuff, and his lectures started looking more like the church, right? It was like more, right? And this is his latest kind of thing where his lectures are really churchy and Baptist minister like and whatnot, right? So the point is that the Nation of Islam itself has all of its transitions. However, in the early stages of the nation, right, when people were making dawah to people in the Nation of Islam, they were making dawah like a real type of dawah, as of compared to a whole, like a couple of decades where you couldn't mention a Nation of Islam without refuting them, right? You understand? And this is from other folks, right? Other folks talking about nation and just their whole approach to nation is just to refute, not to make dawah, but to refute. Meanwhile, you mentioned about Imam Warithin Muhammad, right? And you talked about the transition, right? And the whole point is that people don't realize that the largest transition or mass conversion of people into Sunni Islam in recorded history happened with Imam Warithin Muhammad, right? He brought them from that Nation of Islam into actual traditional Sunni Islam. And how did he do it? With dawah.
Right.
He didn't do it with no refutation. And I have yet to listen to a lecture of Imam Warithin where he just refuting people. I never heard him do that.
Right.
right?
That wasn't his way.
Yeah, you get
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
right? So this is something that, in my opinion, that is foreign to us and has crept into our communities, and now it has built an environment of hostility amongst black, particularly black Muslims and black folk, where we had no hostilities before, right?
Right.
So if you can just if I don't know if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, or whatever, but if you just
Yeah.
tell me
Yeah.
your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that that's a very good observation, and that's a good question. I think that what happened is, let's go back to the Nation of Islam. During the time, I mean, the Nation of Islam was started in 1930.
Yeah,
So Elijah Muhammad, for example, I believe his father or his grandfather were slaves. So this is fresh. And what in particular is fresh is sort of the awareness that we have a shared experience as Black people. We have a
yes,
shared experience, and we have a shared set of challenges that we all must overcome. Therefore, we are identifying in that overarching objective, which is essentially liberation of our people, economic liberation, political liberation, academic, even intellectual liberation, and everything that follows from that. Now, that doesn't mean that we all agree. So, a classic expression of this is the civil rights movement and the Nation of Islam. We know that the civil rights movement had as its aim something quite opposite of what the Nation of Islam had as its aim. But we also have record of Elijah Muhammad and Dr. King meeting and having coffee and sharing. The same thing is true with if you go back in time and you look at the school of Booker T. Washington, not the physical school, uh, Tuskegee, but the school of thought that Booker T. Washington represented. And then you look at the Du Bois school, or the camp, the Du Bois camp. I'm saying that to say you never had 100% agreement between different members of the Black community in terms of how we achieve freedom, but you did have agreement in terms of the fact that we do need to be free. I think that we have to understand our coming into El Islam should be seen in that broad context. In other words, many of our people were attracted to Al Islam for the same reason people were attracted to Garvey, for the same reason people were attracted to the civil rights movement, attracted to Father Divine or whoever. It was a choice made by Black people with the dominant influence in their heart and mind being, we need to be free, and this is what could free us. So even though we were not any, you'll hear the members of our community talk about this. I'm saying the community that was in the nation and transitioned with Imam Muhammad. They would say, even though we weren't Christian, we identified with Dr. King. We listened to I Have a Dream and we loved it. You see what I'm saying?
yeah,
Um, um, Something about our coming into Al Islam, it has killed that. Or I won't, it's not killed, it's not completely dead, but it has damaged it. I think what has happened is that we have not just imported the religion or the different perspectives of the religion. We've also imported the animosities that this particular group has against that particular group. And I attribute it to something that's a little bit more deep. It's not it's so what do I mean? Let's just use an extreme example, and I'm just using this for the sake of elucidating the point. I'm a Shiite, you're a Sunni, quote unquote. And now you and I are arguing about the legitimacy of Ali and Abu Bakr, etc. And our reality is so far removed from that reality. Not that that reality is not something that should be considered, but you and I, after we argue and fight, we both go back to the ghetto. We both go back to single parent homes. We both go back to neighborhoods where there's drugs. We don't have any ownership in the neighborhood, so on and so forth. We don't have political access, economic access, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so we have changed our focus. Not all of us, but too many of us, we have changed our focus coming into Islam, and we've zeroed in on matters that are just not that important for us. So Islam has no longer become, in a lot of ways, the Quran and the tradition of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not really being medicine for our soul. and medicine for our families, and medicine for our condition. We're in a situation now where we're arguing. I'm Hanbali, you're Shafi'i.
Yeah.
I'm Ash'ari, you're Maturidi. And those things are academic.
Mm.
Our problem as a people is not academic, to be in my view. Our problem is not essentially academic. Our problem is essentially psychological, spiritual. It's not even social and economic in education. It's psychological, and upon the basis of our psychology, we can go into those other areas. That's what I really see as the issue. And we're not treating the religion as the answer to those essential issues. So what ends
Thank
up
you.
happening if we are Salafi, if we are Ash'ari, if we're Nation of Islam, if we are Imam Muhammad, we have the same set of pathologies in our communities. It's just a
Yes.
fact.
Exactly.
I know because I deal with them. I deal with all of them, and all of them have the same set of problems. So it's
Yeah.
Negro
Yeah.
problems. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is just what it is.
Yeah.
You know, we
Yeah.
all of us,
Yeah.
all of us. You know, when the grandfather dies and you come to the funeral, and there's one or two extra families there. That's our story. Um,
Mm.
uh, at least one of the uncles or cousins is in prison for murder or drug deal. This is our story. So on and so forth. So I think that what we have to do, it's a part of our growth, though. That's why I don't condemn any group. I just think that it's a part of our maturity as a people. And Islam came to the way it came in the Nation of Islam, it came as an answer to our social ills. When we transitioned, and there were other groups before the nation and the transition of the nation. But I do think that we were not just confronted with a new set of beliefs and ideas. We were confronted with a new culture,
Yes.
a new culture. And for people who we do have black culture, but for people who don't, though we have black culture, we have an identity crisis, whether we like to admit it or not. It's a huge thing for us to become a part to confront a new culture with this identity crisis, because we had black music, we had black language, we had black everything, but we historically have not been the custodians of our own gifts.
Yes.
So we make the blues music, but we don't own any radio stations or record companies,
That
and it's
is
the same
correct.
today. So
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying? So we're more like a tool or instrument in the hands of others. We don't use
Yes.
our own human resources for our own benefit. So we come into Islam with this identity thing, this identity problem, and many of us, we adopt another identity. And because we adopt, it's like a gang almost. You know, you become a part of the gang, and this has to be your enemy. You have to take up, you know,
Yep.
these problems. So
Yep.
that's what I see.
Yep. Yep. And just to follow up on that as well, because you mentioned a lot of, and like I agree with you on everything pretty much, right? What you're saying right there,
Yeah.
right? And as well as there's this conundrum where you were mentioning that we're taking up other people's problems, right, and then making them our own problems without actually addressing our own problems. Meanwhile, the Nation of Islam, and you said it in one of your talks, you know, the Nation of Islam, they didn't come with Islam proper, right? They came with something different, and they were reading a lot from the Bible, right?
Right.
However, one of the things that the nation did is that they used Islam itself, and they exploited the text in order to benefit black people. What do you mean? Like, for example, Malcolm, his famous lecture, you know, he did, right? And then he's talking about the Quran tells us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't have no turn the other cheek in the Quran. The Quran tells us, and the
Right.
man hits you, then send him to the cemetery, right? We know
Right.
this what he said, right? And the Quran doesn't say that, but we get the gist. You know what he's talking: an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, and a
Right.
head for a head, and a life for a life, right? I think that's the House Negro and Field Negro speech. He's talking like that, right?
Yes.
But it's true. That's what the Quran says, right? The Quran doesn't actually say it. Eye for eye, head for a head, a life for a life, right? It says that, right?
Right.
So they were using the verses of the Quran to actually help black people move forward. And it was like that for a long time when you talked about blacks and Muslims, and even Worthy Muhammad himself, he himself, right, his whole idea wasn't to keep people under his thumb. That like it
Right.
was very clear,
Right.
right? And even Imam Siraj Wal Hajj, he's mentioned the conversations that he used to have with Imam Wardeen and whatnot. And Imam Wardeen used to encourage the people in his community to go overseas, study Islam, and come back and bring back knowledge. And I believe, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he mentioned that his father wanted to do the same thing, right? Elijah Muhammad
Right.
wanted to do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So this is a natural progression
Right.
of Islam. This is how you naturally progress. You get
Right.
me? And
Right.
every other community was able to naturally progress. We are the only community that I can think of on earth that we are not allowed to naturally progress. We always have some other folk in our business. But
Yeah.
if you could just,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, most people forget. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad. We know what the Nation of Islam taught. Okay, we don't have to
yeah,
beat around that bush. However, what most people fail to take into consideration is the fact that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was not the former. He didn't form those ideas. He was
yeah,
actually taught those ideas by a man from India.
mm,
And Elijah Muhammad had a third grade education.
mm,
We were already believing that the white man was God. We were
yes,
Christians.
yeah.
So you have to put
And
things
many
in.
of us still do. Let's make no
Yeah,
mistake.
yeah.
Most of us got Christian family. I used to get in arguments with my grandma about this before she passed.
Right.
Right. So yeah.
So
So go
so
ahead.
so this is the broader context. It's like when you go before a judge.
yeah.
And one of the teachings of Islam is that Allah is because He's all knowing. That's why He's the most merciful. So in judgment, like let's say for example, I was born into a family where my mother was a prostitute, my father was a drug dealer, and I end up a street guy. That's different if I grew up, like in just a two-parent upper middle class
Only.
household, and then I end up a street guy.
Mm,
I chose, both instances we made the choice, but the pressure upon me to make said choice is different depending upon context. So we have,
yeah.
we have to become mature to have these types of um, uh, discussions. The presence of Christianity in the life of Black people was so strong, and it still is. To make your point, um, so here's a man like Elijah Muhammad. He's not the only one, but I'm just using him as an example. Third grade education, taught by a man who tells him this is what Islam is.
Yeah.
He doesn't. He goes in that direction.
Yeah.
However, we do know that he sent his son Akbar, who passed away. May Allah forgive him his sins and grant him paradise, to Azhar University. And Akbar Muhammad was one of the first African Americans to go to Azhar, and he was supposed to have a responsibility. He even expressed to Imam Muhammad that he wanted to send him to Azhar. Um, one of the things that we had in our community during the time of Imam Muhammad, we had a delegation of students studying Damascus, Syria, under the Grand Mufti Sheikh Kuftaro, the Grand Mufti of Syria, who has also passed away. But that relationship began during the Nation of Islam. He came, he used to travel the world, and he had students across the world. And he came to America in I think it was late 60s. And he was told by the Muslims here, there's a group of deviant Black people who claim Islam, but they're not real Muslims. They have these wild beliefs. Don't go see them. The Grand Mufti, he said, I'm a da'i. If you're telling me that they're claiming Islam, but they have these wild beliefs, I have to go see them now. And that's exactly what he did. He came to Chicago. He met with Elijah Muhammad, and he offered the opportunity for students to study in the university back then. Elijah Muhammad told him, "My people aren't ready now, but one day they will be." That was his response. Fast forward, late 90s, the offer still on the table. Imam Muhammad accepts it. So, like a couple of the imams here in Atlanta, alongside myself, that um, um, that is what they went there. They were part of that delegation, and several other teachers in our community across the country. They were afforded that opportunity to study in Damascus, Syria. So I'm just using it as an example of how you have to really look at the whole scope. Even Imam Muhammad, he was put out 3 times, but he was, by the time Elijah Muhammad was passing away, Elijah Muhammad had authorized him to become the leader of the Nation of Islam. This was already known, but prior, like a year before Elijah Muhammad's passing, Imam Muhammad at that time was going around to the different communities telling them, my father's going to be passing soon and I'm going to be the new leader, and prepare for change. This is like common teaching in the Nation of Islam. So when we observe these things, we have to just see it in full context. Now, this does not excuse, to be clear, this does not excuse false belief. We can't say false belief is false belief. You know what I mean? That just is what it is. But I think what has happened with the Nation of Islam under Minister Farrakhan, they've actually went backwards, to be honest. He has. A lot of these young people, they this is all they know, but particularly him and some of those senior officials with him, they went backwards. So I think what is upon us today is really in the Black Muslim community, no matter what our particular backgrounds are. I think what the challenge is upon us today is to have access to correct Islamic knowledge, number one. And then number two, we need the wherewithal to extract from that knowledge what would be a help for our unique circumstance. And that's what if I had to fault our leadership, I'm just speaking about the nation, not the nation, but I'm saying the nation, the United States, Canada too. I would say, what I would fault Black Muslim leadership with, these those of us who come after the days of the transition and all of that, we sort of just we're not taking the ingredients and baking from scratch. We're like buying ready-made dinners. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. We're just, whatever we learn, we're just dropping it on our communities. But we're not saying, I have this, now let me see, what do my people need? And I said this before, I'm sure you heard it. I don't think, we have some magnificent arguments for the oneness of Allah in our kalam and aqidah. Wonderful arguments. But if you present these arguments, these rational arguments, to the average person that's from the church, that doesn't free him from his shirk. Because again, he's been given an image of a white man as God for generations now. So you can give him as many rational arguments as possible, but as soon as a white man comes into the room, he acts differently,
Different, This is us. This is who we are, right? I'm so happy you said that, right? With Black folk, most Black people, you don't need to convince them that Allah exists.
Right.
They believe in that already, right?
Yeah.
Right. The problem is like you said, this type of mental slavery that is attached to the belief in Allah Himself.
Right.
You get me? So many of us, we come from the church. I came from the church myself. My grandmother, both my parents, they worshiped white Jesus. I went to church and I worshiped white Jesus. That was my reality. My wife went to church. She worshiped white Jesus. You get me?
Yeah.
All my aunts and uncles, they did the same thing. My cousins did the same thing. Right. My sister did the same thing. Right. So this is where we come from. You don't have to convince us that Allah exists, right? And in many cases, you don't even have to convince us that Allah is one.
Right.
You don't even have to do that at all, right? Because even though we are seeing, Jesus, we're worshiping, white Jesus and whatnot. In our minds, we kind of understand that Allah is one, anyways. This is not the problem, right?
Right.
So this doesn't really take too much convincing, right? What needs convincing is to get us out of this type of mental slavery and this inferiority complex that is deeply injected into our DNA, and it emulates in the way that we act, the way that we carry ourselves, the way that we go outside, the way that we treat each other. You know what I mean?
That's big.
The way that you treat other Black people. That's why we say all the time here that our MO with other Black folks should be one of mercy and forgiveness, not of this type of attacking and harshness and refutation. We don't need that because there's so much of that. There's so much dogma in the black community right now. With you have the Israelites with this way out there
Yeah.
dogmatic stuff, and then you have these new guys, these American Indian guys, or whatever, like
Right.
I
Oh
don't
yeah.
know if you what's this Dane Calloway's and stuff like that. This
Hmm.
is just some crazy stuff, man. But only
Yeah.
black people are falling into it because it's all like this attacking each other. That's the thing that needs to be dealt with.
Right.
You get me?
Yeah.
We don't need more
Yeah.
things to attack each other with. We have too much of that already. But anyways, I talk too much. Go ahead, Sheikh. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, no. I mean, I agree, and I would circle back around to identity. I think that's the real issue. I hear. We weren't brought here from Africa. We were already here. We were Native Americans and slaves. Just a
Yeah.
complete rewriting of history. We're the original Hebrews.
Yeah.
It's an identity problem.
Yes.
We're struggling to find who we are,
Mhm.
and the reality is, with all of these various descriptions that Nation of Islam, the original man is the Asiatic black man. In the final analysis, what is it doing? It's not really doing anything. It's just
Yes.
making us feel good.
Yeah.
So that's the way Imam Muhammad taught us, and the way, as I understand it, the problem of identity has to be located in the pure language of the Quran. And because sometimes, as in the case of our people, the world can rob you of so much that you don't. The only thing, for Allah, yabda'ul khalqa thumma yu'idu. He begins the creation and he repeats it. So if you lose your humanity, you have to really turn to the one who gave it to you in the first place. And we have our prophet, prayers and peace be upon him, as the model of the best of what the human creation is. And I think that is where our focus should be, the teachings of the Quran, the tradition of our prophet. So if I were to write a book addressing, I have some in the works, but I'm just saying this sort of rhetorically, writing a book addressing our condition, I would start with identity, and the identity of us is abstract first before it's concrete. I have two sons. One is light skinned, one is brown skinned. One has more the light skinned one has more wild hair like mine, and
Yeah.
the brown skin, it lays down a little bit more like his mother. It's a little bit more.
Thank
Yeah.
Thank
He's tall and lanky like his mother. The brown skin is tall and lanky like his mother's side. The light skin has my build. So, but they're brothers. These things are called accidents philosophically.
Yes.
We don't have any control over them, and these things are not important. These things are not the
Yes.
real human being. That's why Allah, He says in the Quran that in the judgment, the hands, the feet, the limbs will testify against the owner. So the owner is the real person, and the owner is the mind, the morality, the free will, and all of these other things that we associate with our true humanity. That's the real person. So before we have black skin, before we have thick lips or thick noses or nappy hair or straight hair, whatever the case may be, we have the human form, nafsin wahida.
Yes.
And that's where we should start in identifying ourselves. Now, upon that basis, or from that human essence, we come into all of these other things. And all of these things are beautiful. But if we have an appreciation for all of these external qualities or descriptions, and we don't have our primary attention on the internal qualities, then we lose sight of everything. Even in the Quran, and I get a lot of pushback from this from blacks, but I know they're dealing with the same problem. In the Quran, I'm not talking about the Bible now. In the Quran, the prophets are never discussed for or highlighted for their physical features. It's hardly ever even hinted at.
Yeah, never mentioned.
Never mentioned. When we read about Ibrahim alayhi salam, for an example, we are really reading about the disposition of mind that he has. He's observing the heavens, searching for God. He's questioning his people, challenging them. Really, he's asking Allah, "Show me how the dead are raised." So this is the intellect. This is the abstract entity. Um, when we read about Yusuf alayhi salam, we do read that he was beautiful, so much so that
Yeah,
the
I was
women
about to mention that.
put their hands.
That's the closest thing you get to a
Right.
physical description. Yeah.
But notice Allah's not, those people are doing that. It's not Allah doing that. Those women are
Yeah,
cutting
yeah,
their hand. He
yeah, yeah.
he what we read about him, so when he is approached by the wife of the Aziz,
Mm,
he restrains from her. When he goes into
mm,
prison, they say, "We see you're a man of excellent character. Give us the interpretation of the dreams." When he's free from the prison, before he even accepts freedom, he says, "What's the condition of the women who cut their hand?" So time and time again, his ihsan as a servant of Allah, his ihsan is being shown to us, because
mm,
these qualities, these abstract qualities, are what's universal. And if we could
mm,
form ourselves as individuals and as people, if we can reform
mm,
ourselves upon the basis of these abstracts, that really brings about our growth and development as Muslims. That's what we really need to be, following the prophetic models. So that's what I think. We're very quick, I think, as a thing, especially with black men. I don't see it so much with black women, but I've had it on my channel. You know, I know that they're black men. I can just tell how they're coming. Where have you studied from? Oh, who told you that's true? Nobody. The whites, the Pakistanis, no one else. I get people from all over the
no,
world
yeah,
messaging me. None of them come at
yeah,
me that way. It's always other black men. So
yeah,
we know how this thing goes. You know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, there's a very important thing that you addressed, right? When Allah has created uh, the things and then He repeats it, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, if you look at uh, the situation of Black folk, we are the descendants of slavery here in the West, and slavery most often is approached in terms of morality and legal civil rights. However, the powers that shouldn't be, when they were inventing this thing called white supremacy, and they were just developing this new system, right, some 500 years ago, they really intended to make a permanent class of slaves, so much so that they said that these black folks are not even human.
Right.
You get me? So they were trying to do exactly what Allah was doing, right? They're trying to create something and repeat it,
Mhm.
and so they codified this in their literature, in their sciences, from Darwin and his what's the name of his book again? The Origin of Species, right?
Mhm.
From
Yeah.
that book, and the theory of evolution. They're trying to many sciences were actually invented because of white supremacy, like
Right.
eugenics,
Right.
like anthropology, like criminology from Cesare. What's his name? Cesare. Uh, I can't remember. His name is on the tip of my tongue. But
Right.
anyways, the point is, they were telling the world that these black folks are only good to be beasts of burden. That's what
Right.
they were telling the world, right? And so the whole entire world now is participating in this system, right? It doesn't make a difference where you're from. Okay, the whole world is participating in the system
Mhm.
of global white supremacy, and they're
Mhm.
basically saying the same things. They're not looking at the fact that the most aggressive,
Mhm.
jump in education in history took place when black folks at the Reconstruction period went from pretty much 0% literacy all the way up to the high 60s within
Yeah.
12 years.
Yeah.
In a 12-year period, this took place. They're not
Mhm.
looking at the fact that without schools, without support from the government or whatnot, that black folks had their own functioning um, cities with banks and
That's right.
institutions and grocery, and they were running all of this until they were violently razed to the ground, like similar to what we see right now happening in Gaza, but on a ancient scale.
Right.
You get me?
Oh
They were
yeah.
being bombed. Yes, they were being bombed. They were being blown up into oblivion, and the survivors have already recorded these stories. Nobody's looking at that, right? But what they look at is the fact that black people are aggressive and they are violent and they are drug dealers and uneducated because this is what's being pushed
Right.
through the media, right?
Right.
So now we have this Quran, right? And we have the Sunnah, which gives us a step by step and a play by play how to get out of these conditions.
Hmm.
And it's something that has worked time and time and time and time and time again. There is no people on earth, in my humble opinion, that's more similar to the desert Arabs of Arabia at the time of the Prophet Muhammad than the Western black descendants of slaves. Right? What they were going through in tribal warfare, we're going through in gang warfare. What they were going through at the killing of each other, right? We're going through it and killing with each other today. Alcoholism, whatever, we're dealing with alcoholism and drugs and all this kind of stuff. All these things are very similar.
Yeah.
And on top of that, they were looked at by the entire world at that time as the armpit of humanity. Okay,
Correct. Yeah.
which is what we are looked at right now. So these situations that we're in right now can, in my opinion, they can actually be rectified, right? And it's not a cliche. They can actually be rectified with the Quran and Sunnah
Hmm.
because it's already been done for more than one people. It's been done for the South Asians, right? When the South Asians were under Dharmic religions, and when the Mughals ruled India for how many centuries, they were a very rich, wealthy kingdom.
Yeah.
That was done for the East African nations, like Egypt and whatnot. It was done for
Yeah.
like so many people had brought their people out of a desolate condition and raised their people up uh, spiritually, economically, and socially with Islam,
Right.
right? So, what is it that is preventing us as Black people from doing this?
Well, I think that that's another really good question. I think that I would go so far as to say, from my study of history, I don't know of any people who have been as deformed in their nature as we have been. Even the Arabs, during the time of our prophet, prayers and peace be upon him, they still had, trade was big amongst the Meccans. They
Mhm,
had their own history of that. They had their own tradition of poetry. They
mhm,
glorified in language. So they had some sense of self. The history that you recounted, it's a history that was really designed to empty us out of any
mhm,
trace of our humanity. And so I would, as a matter of fact, there's another book that I'm working on, um, revolving around the notion of black suffering. Dr. Sherman Jackson wrote a book several years ago, Black Suffering in the Islam and the Problem of Black Suffering. I think that's what he called it.
mhm,
And this is really a theological issue taken up by Christians prior to uh, Muslims. Really, most of the Christians borrowed it from Muslims, um,
mhm,
the Nation of Islam days, but they put it in theological language. And basically, it centers on the question of, if God is a God of justice and mercy, why does he allow bad things to happen? Why does suffering occur in the world? Black suffering, it locates it in our history from slavery to Jim Crow, et cetera, et cetera. Um,
mhm,
what Dr. Jackson did, he really dealt with that question from the lens of the Maturidi, the Ash'ari, the Mu'tazili, and the Athari schools of theology. So, in
mhm,
other words, he just he took the standard schools of Islamic theology and said, would be the opinion of each school of why black people suffer. I think what
mhm,
the book is excellent, but I think what he did do, he deviated from the standard African American position, which was very basic.
mhm,
We looked at scripture and we looked for where, like Yusuf, where
mhm,
people were made to suffer. And we saw whatever God did with them,
mhm,
this is his way, what we call in Islam the Sunnah of Allah. Allah
mhm,
never changes his Sunnah. So if God allowed for Yusuf to be put into slavery and then put into prison, but also situated him to rise high in that society, that's his Sunnah. If Allah permitted the children of Israel generations later to be made slaves, yet be liberated, this is his Sunnah. So we should anticipate the same thing. Um, So that's sort of a general framework. I think what's holding us back, though, what you pointed out. I'm trying to make sure I say it in a careful way, but what you pointed out,
Mhm.
this is where all people need leaders. Leaders who are sensitive to what we're talking about. Leaders who, and I'm not saying like a sheikh or a scholar, I'm talking about a leader now. Someone who says, wait a minute, this is where we need to go. And they ask Allah for help and for guidance. I think that we're in a lull period. We've had that since the days of slavery. But I think we're in the first time in our history as a people where we don't really have voices and minds who are thinking community progress, collective progress, and thinking about what our struggle is. I think most of our African American teachers in Islam, they're just students. They're
Yep.
students. They're not leaders per se. They're excellent teachers and they're excellent students, but they're not leaders. Leadership is vision, and you know what I'm saying? It's vision, is spirit, is tenacity, independent of anything else. So, I think we are. There's sort of like a build up right now where people are looking for that. That's really what we need. We need more leadership. Um, and again, I repeat, Dr. King wasn't the highest in knowledge, just to use that example, but there was a definite vision that people could draw into to chart the course. I think we have come into Al-Islam and we're making an adjustment right now. We're trying to figure out what this thing is all about, because we have so many influences from the Muslim world coming amongst us. We have all of this infighting, and we do have a part of that infighting has caused us to ignore our own history. You know, we ignore the Nation of Islam days as kufr. We ignore the Imam Muhammad days as, you know, not all the way authentic. You know, he didn't have a school. He didn't. I've heard guys say this. You know, he didn't have a school. So we're busy picking ourselves apart as opposed to just really looking at the total context of what has brought us to where we are today. At the same time, there is progress happening, though. You know what I'm saying? So we have to just be patient. One of the things that people tend to not realize is that they're actually in the course of making history. I do believe that we are making history right now. We just don't see it because we're just in the
We're
struggle.
just starting.
Yeah, but I think when people look back, they'll say, "Oh wow, they were doing," and they'll look at us perhaps as some type of heroes, though we were just being regular brothers and regular sisters. You know what I mean?
Allah, yeah.
Mm.
Now you mentioned something that is very important, and I mentioned this on the channel many times, that just because you studied overseas and you learned Islam, that does not necessitate that you're a leader. You might be a great teacher,
Mm-hmm.
you might be great at orator or whatever, or delivering or disseminating some Islamic,
Mm-hmm.
classes or whatnot. But that doesn't necessitate leadership, right? Leadership is something completely and totally different,
Yeah.
right? And there is a disconnect with the people who follow in the black community and the people who lead. There's a wide gap, more than any other community, because we black folk will tear down our leadership.
Mm.
And this again is an unnatural, unorganic way of thinking, or a way of basically codifying your culture. No other people does this.
Right.
Nobody intentionally tries to tear down their own leadership. They don't do
Yeah.
that. We
Yeah.
are the only ones who do that. And this again is something that is a part of our history and a part of our history in terms of interference, because this uh, this quirk in the way that black folk think is something that J. Edgar Hoover tried to implement
Mm-hmm.
and have it going on autopilot with the
Correct.
very famous COINTELPRO, right?
Correct.
And before that, even before Edgar Hoover did that, we had meritorious manumission laws,
Mm-hmm.
which was essentially promoting scabbing within the black community, right?
Right.
Essentially, uh, when you were a slave, you could be freed if you had invented something that benefited white society,
Right.
or if you had saved your white masters, right? Or if you had snitched on a runaway slave or a slave revolt. If you had snitched on these revolts and caused these rebellions to be quelled, you would be given your freedom. And
Mm-hmm.
I said it before. I believe that this meritorious manumission is an extent is sorry, COINTELPRO is an extension of meritorious manumission, because
Right.
it basically promotes the selling out and the tearing down of your leadership, tearing down of your own people. And the quicker that we as Black people see what the game is and what is actually going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, these are things that are mentioned in both in the Quran and the Sunnah, that if we actually practice, then we would get over this hump in terms of the way that the general public deals with the leadership and how the leadership deals with the general public.
Right.
You get me?
Oh, yeah.
You understand? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this wide gap, right? And it's hardwired in our DNA to go against our leadership, but yet we have the tools to quell this, and nobody's addressing it. So
Yeah.
if you want to go ahead and address it right now, go ahead.
Well, I think that leadership is not something that we are taught to do. I don't think leadership is something that we can't be trained. We're called to it. And I think that those who feel that they've been called to it, they have to move forward without fear of any criticism, just knowing that that's our condition. So that's probably never going to not be with us. This thing of tearing each other down. That's at least not for a long time. That's probably going to be with us for a long time. What we need now, we just need individual persons who, if you register the need and if you see the issue, you step up to address it. That's the best I can say. I mean, I don't think, we have these problems, but the problems don't define us, in my view. I just don't think that they do. I think that where we want to go as a people is much more important than the forces that are before us. But to just give some analysis to your point, that's true. I mean, if you read about the history of the slave rebellions and how they were foiled, it was always another slave.
Yep.
It was never
meritorious manumission.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's actually crazy. It's like we're slaves.
Yeah.
We're actually all slaves. Why would you go tell on me? So that stays with us. Even what's that most recent movie? Judas and the Black Messiah.
Yeah.
The guy, he kills himself a day after the
his name
original,
is William. What's his name? I can't remember his name. William
can't remember.
Or other. Yeah.
But after the original thing broadcasted, he because it was eating away at his soul, So this is something that has been put upon us.
And that was COINTELPRO.
That's COINTELPRO. Exactly.
Yep. So if you look at meritorious manumission, what was it? It was the meritorious manumission which incentivized the slaves to put down the rebellions. And the COINTELPRO, what was it? It was the COINTELPRO which incentivized infiltration and snitching and false information being spread within Black groups to basically discredit and tear them down. And that's why we haven't seen any significant Black leadership since Malcolm and Martin because of this. Because of this. And the closest thing in my opinion, that we had is honestly, with all honesty, is Louis Farrakhan. That's the closest thing, right? Yeah. So, but anyways, I digress. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I would agree, and I think that the thing with Farrakhan, I think they actually permitted him to do his work, because when you really analyze his work, he's not calling the people to anything. He's not the Nation of Islam hasn't really built anything. Whereas before, in the days of Elijah Muhammad, we could look at the farmland and the stores and the school system. The Nation of Islam under Farrakhan hasn't really built anything. It's more like a much more extreme version, I would say, is Dr. Umar Johnson. And Dr. Umar has his merits, but he doesn't call the people to anything. He just complains about the state of the world. So what that actually does, it holds our productive energy in suspense. We're mad. We know we don't like it. We know that we're complaining about the world, but we don't have any rational, practical plan to do anything about it. So that's that. We have so when I go, so let's look at Imam Muhammad for a minute, particularly in connection with this subject. Imam Muhammad, one of his, he actually said this of himself. His job, he understood his role as giving his students perception. Perception. Why? Why are we in this condition? Why is it that the powers that exist, why do they want blacks in this particular role to be non-productive? Why us? Why not the Asians? Why not the people of the Middle East? Have the people in the Middle East played a role in this? And if they have, why? What are they getting out of it? So it's almost like his job was putting, as I understand him, a big part of it was giving proper analysis so that we can have an understanding of what our condition is. And from that basis, we move forward. So we need a movement. Some of my associates, I'm actually calling for. We need a new movement based upon Islam, the purity of Islam, and the where we put into practice these things that we're talking about. Well, I think the new leadership movement is not to be one where we're all tied into like members of a body tied in it. Because if you cut the head, the body withers. But we do need a strong association of brothers who are joined for a common goal, and that common goal should be based upon an agenda that we ourselves craft, and we hold ourselves accountable to it. It's not crafted by what I learned in my Islamic studies program. It's crafted by what I learned from the religion and what my needs are as a people. So I think that we are in this particular turning point, and this turning point has called upon us to rethink and become reinvigorated in terms of what our goal is to be. And I think that's really where we are. All associates feel the same. Like we all talk about the same thing. Everyone feels the same way. So it's something that's the moment itself is stirring within us, and we have to be linked together for that role, or for that work, I should say. Yep.
Just before we continue, I just want to give a special shout out to Sister Tika Harding with the $10 super chat. MashaAllah, mashallah. May Allah reward you, bless you, and multiply it for you a millionfold. Ameen, ameen, ameen. Everybody ameens. And she says, Salaam Alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Barakallah fikum. Another great topic. Well, you know that's how we do it. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. We only do the great topics. MashaAllah. 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 Right. And of course, our esteemed guests here, Brother Rashad, Abdul-Rahman holding it down. Jazakallah khair. I really, really appreciate the brother visiting us on our channel. So let's get back to the nitty gritty. Okay. All right. So now, when you're mentioning also about leadership, well, one of the things that we mentioned here on the channel as well is that really it doesn't require everybody to be on the same page at the same time. As long as you have a few people getting the ball rolling, eventually, as you mentioned, the movement itself, it will grow, right? It will grow. But you have to be consistent, and you have to have just a few people on the same page. And eventually, Allah will bless you with it as long as you're committed to what Allah has revealed. You know what I mean? Allah's going to bless you. You get me? Allah doesn't leave oppressed people like that, even though you may think He's abandoning the oppressed. Allah doesn't do that. You get me? But when the oppressed people show commitment to Him, then you will see Allah, basically the help of Allah, it will come. What we have here, and when we're reading the Quran and whatnot, we have a lot of stories in the Quran, and a lot of stories mention a lot of the prophets and the miracles that Allah has given them in order to succeed. So Allah has given us a forever miracle, right? That will work forever in both the Quran and the Sunnah, right? And it's not a cliche, or it's not like something that's but this is something, again, as we mentioned before, it has worked time and time and time and time again through. Just read
Right.
Islamic history. Read how people were backwards people, and then they started practicing in Islam, and their entire society has just changed. You get me?
Right.
Right? And the closest people you can read about in this terms of this situation to black people, in my opinion, is the desert Arabs. Read about what happened to the Beni Israel with Pharaoh and Musa. In my opinion, the closest people in our time, right, to that people is no doubt it's black people. Like no doubt.
Oh, yeah,
It's like
I
you're
agree.
reading our own story. You get me?
I agree.
You know,
I
so
agree.
but what was it? It wasn't all the people coming on board at the same time. It just started with a few people on code and building that community, building that communal fabric of the society through the most rigorous dedication to social codes of conduct. You get me? Revealed in the Quran and Sunnah, and we're talking about small little things here, like you know, don't disrespect your elders, things like this. You know,
Mhm.
don't speak when you're angry, speak a good word or remain silent. You
Right.
know, and as Allah says in the Quran that or the Prophet sallallahu, he said, "I have only been sent except to perfect manners in people." Right?
Mhm.
Once these social codes of conduct are perfected, and you're going to, if you're dedicated to struggling with your people in adhering to these social codes and adhering to what Allah has revealed, right? You're going to struggle. Of course, you're going to struggle in the beginning, but the success is after the struggle. You get
Yeah.
me? But anyways, I'm just talking. What do you think about that? Sorry,
No,
Shay.
no, I agree. I think that I'm in agreement with the parallel between our people and the desert Arabs, the parallel between our people and the people of Musa, and I think that a part of the guidance that we have to extract from that is that it took a man like Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It took a man like Musa, upon him be peace, to uh, lead those people. So I think those of us who are sensitive to this problem, we have to make a concentrated effort to purify ourselves and condition ourselves to be of service. It may not even be us, it may be one of our sons or grandsons, because we made the intention to condition ourselves. Among them will come leaders to galvanize the people,
Yes.
because leadership is important. And leadership is not only in the individual, there are leadership movements. There are movements in leadership where one hands it down to the responsibility down to the other. I do believe Islamic knowledge is necessary for that. I do believe that Islamic spirituality is necessary for that, but it's not on a cookie cutter pattern that's brought in from elsewhere. It's authentically derived from what the needs are amongst us. So the 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 challenge for us is just to orient ourselves towards it. Those of us who are sensitive to the need. Um, uh, we have. I mean, there's a lot to be happy about, and there's a lot to be proud of in Black America, or just in the Western Hemisphere, in terms of Black people and our coming into Islam. We just have to be aware of where we need to go. Um, One of the things that we did, we started an institute um, centered on Quranic study. We're going to build it out, actually, inshallah, to incorporate the sciences of Islam as a whole. But one of our central focuses is leadership. So we have these types of discussions as well. Um, and that's just, I believe that's just African American tradition. Like Dr. Carter G. Woodson, we're just coming out of Black History Month. I mean, he was not just an academic, he was a leader. He initiates Negro History Week because he sees this as a need for us, for it to be impressed upon us, a sense of pride and dignity about our history. So that,
Yep. Yep.
because essentially a people without knowledge of their history are a people with as Garvey said, a tree without roots. So
Yes.
he was a leader in that regard. And I think that that's really the challenge that's upon us. Do you all where you are in Canada? Do you all have any Black Muslim popular Black Muslim teachers or centers of learning?
I think the most in all of North America, to be honest, in my humble opinion.
You have the
The most
most.
popular, the most popular Black Muslim modern leadership in all of North America come out of Canada, like your Dr. Bilal Phillips, like your
Mm,
Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick, who is just amazing when it comes to Black history. Just,
okay.
like I can't think of anybody who's more relevant in Black history than Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick in terms of the Muslims, in my humble opinion, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
they're coming out of both out of University of Medina. Dr. Bilal Phillips is, both of them have PhDs. Dr. Abdul Hakim Quick, he wrote the book. It's called Deeper Roots,
Mm.
where he's essentially showing the history of Muslims in the Americas before
Oh yeah, I read that book.
Columbus. Yeah, you
Yeah,
read it,
yeah, I
right?
read
So
that.
you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Yeah, is and so that's my humble opinion, right? I mean, you have, like, of course, you have your American Muslim Black leaders and whatnot, but these are two incredibly important giants in Dawa, whose names should be respected within the Black community as a whole in North America, in my opinion, right? Whether or not
Is it?
we agree or disagree with them in terms of aqidah or
Yeah.
or or manhaj or anything like that, right? Because I'm not going to agree with everything that Dr. Abdul Hakim Quick says or Dr. Bilal Phillips says, right?
Yeah.
But but I'm going to respect them as our elders. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, right? But I want to open it
No,
up
no. Yeah.
for questions as well, Sheikh Rashad, right? So just keep going so I can prepare Brother C.L. Edwards in the background, right?
Well, I
Go
was
ahead.
actually going to follow. I had a follow up question. Do you think there's something about the environment in Canada that
Mhm.
has situated you all to produce the giants?
Well, ironically enough, it's because that these two they came at a completely different time, right? They came
Mm,
in that transitional period, the initial transitional period, right? So, Doctor Abdul Hakim Quick, he's from the Black Panthers, right? From way
okay.
back in the day, right? And he was in Boston, and he's escaping the U.S., right? Because as you know, the U.S. government was assassinating Panthers and arresting them, and that.
Yes.
So he escaped to Canada,
Mm,
right? And I believe it was this time that where he met Dr. Bilal Phillips, and he made dawah to Dr. Bilal Phillips, who was he's an academic, but he was an atheist at that time,
wow.
right? Right. So, and it's rare to find a Black atheist, even at that time, right?
Yeah.
So you can imagine at that time being a Black atheist, and he was a communist and whatnot, Dr. Bilal Phillips, right? So what he did is that he made dawah to Dr. Bilal Phillips, and Dr. Bilal Phillips it became Muslim. So you can imagine a shahada like that, because Dr. Bilal Phillips, thousands, literally thousands, I don't know, maybe even so many thousands of people came to Islam because of his dawah, right?
Mm,
So many, just original dawah and like that, right? And these were the first graduates out of Medina University, right? Two Black men,
mm,
right? The very
right.
first students from the West to go to Medina University. And Dr. Bilal Phillips, he's a Jamaican background, and Dr. Abdul Hakim Quick, he's American background, but they're both like Canadians, right? So,
Mm,
and but as you know, uh, things are always subject to change when it comes to Zaddy, and I'm sorry to say like that, but but
yeah,
but
that's how it goes.
yeah, Zaddy and them is trying to censor those two, so they had a lot of fitna and trials, as it is with Dawa, anyways, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, but at any rate, like I said, it's not just a leadership problem, but it's a followership problem, especially with Black folk,
I
more than
agree.
any other people on Earth, right? Because Black folk will bury their own, and they will do it habitually. They'll bury
That's
their
true.
own before they say nothing, or you don't have to say anything. Just because you're afraid to say something, just don't say anything, but don't
Right.
bury your own,
Yeah.
because the enemy will always find something against your leaders, so that you'll always have material against your leadership.
That's
The,
true.
the enemy is good at that, right?
That's what he
The
does.
enemy
Yeah.
is good at digging up dirt. You get me?
Yeah.
All right. So keep going, Sheikh.
Yeah, I mean that last point you made is interesting. The last lecture Imam Muhammad gave to his community, he was
Mm,
referencing just that point of how
mm,
we bury our own leaders. You know,
mm.
they don't die, we bury them.
Yes.
And that again, it goes back to we know that uh, I can't even think of it right now, but the classic take the biggest, strongest male slave and beat him down in front of all of
Buck
the
breaking.
men, women, children. What's that?
Buck breaking.
Willie Lynch, buck
Willie
breaking.
Lynch.
Now
Yeah.
we know
Yeah.
Willie Lynch is a composite character. We know that it's not
Yeah.
true,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
what it represents is a truth, and
Yes.
I think that's just a part of what has been put upon us. So we have to work very hard and very consciously to see to it
Mm,
that we don't succumb to those type of forces. Um,
mm,
because a part of the leadership that we need is visionary, and another
mm,
part of the leadership that we need is academic as well.
mm,
I was influenced by. I didn't know Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick was in Canada, but
mm,
his research on the connection between Islam and West Africa,
mm,
and then the early Muslims that came here. It was very influential on me as a young person just studying. So
mm.
uh, we need individuals like that, just
Yes.
from a research perspective, because again, if we're a people that have been emptied out of a sense of history, then that kind of research helps restore some of these things that's been put upon us. And then um, we need people of vision to for example, I think one of the things that's kind of foaming up in Black America is the notion that, hey, a lot of the reason why we haven't had access to the same economic share is because we just haven't had equal knowledge. You know,
Mm,
that was an old teaching in the first. You know, you want to be equal with the white man, get equal knowledge, and
mm,
we just don't know how the market works. We just don't know how real estate works. We just don't know how. So there's a movement now to get African Americans just literate in business, literate in
mm,
finance. That's visionary.
mm,
Obviously, it runs into trouble when it doesn't have the moral substance to it. But we do
mm,
have Muslims in business. Like here in Atlanta, we have some very successful Muslim business persons,
mm.
and I think we do in other parts of the country too. So I guess I'm saying it to say one of the needs that I see that we have is not so much just a leader or there's a leadership deficit. I think there's not enough cross pollination.
Mm,
There's not enough awareness of what we do have.
mm,
So, one of the things that we want to do on our show, we really want to bring on more people, individuals of means and substance to contribute, and have them offer their perspective.
mm.
Because I think the more that we have, even like this program right now, the more we have instances to kind of have exchange and we get to know each other, we find out how rich our community, our broader Black Muslim community really is. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why one of the main reasons I reached out to you, because like I said, it just starts with a small group. That's it. Right? I hope Brother C how he comes back, right? I think he was having some trouble with his connection there,
Oh,
right?
okay.
But anyways, the link is in the chat, family. If you want to ask the Imam Rashad some questions, before we continue, I want to give a special shout out to Brother Bilal Gajepko with the 10-pound super chat. Hayakum Allah. May Allah reward you and bless you and multiply for you a millionfold. Ameen. 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 Hold on,
Amen.
I got let's do this one again. 1 second. 1 second, family. We ghetto. We have to do the ghetto stuff, right? So I'm so sorry, man,
No,
Rashad.
you
We're
fine,
just
bro.
not like you. You're really professional, man. You got your whole team and everything like that. But
No,
it's
no,
just
man.
me up here, and I'm so dusty. I apologize. Let's do this one more. There we go. All right. All right, so Brother Bilal, he says, make sure this gets shared far and wide. May Allah place it heavily on your scales. Ameen, ameen,
Amen.
ameen. May Allah multiply it for you a millionfold. Ameen, ameen, ameen. May
Amen.
everybody, ameens in the chat. Ameens in the chat. Hayakumullah. All right, so let's get back to the nitty gritty. Okay. All right. So go ahead, Brother Rashad.
Oh no, I concluded my point on that the latest question that you asked.
All right. All
Yes,
right.
sir.
Excellent. Excellent. Right. So, you mentioned about the economics because
Hmm.
what Islam hasn't translated to in the West is that economic development. You get me?
Right.
And in my opinion, the reason why that is because there has been no focus on that at all whatsoever. And meanwhile, if you're reading the books of the Sunnah, there's entire chapters, like
Hmm.
whole chapters, like the book of Tijara, right, the book of business in Bukhari, right, and then you
Right.
have the book of zakat, or because I said it before on this channel, zakat. Many people translate zakat as charity, but really it's not charity. What zakat
Right.
is, in my humble opinion, you can correct me if I'm wrong. In my humble opinion, zakat is group economics.
Mm.
That's what it is, right? It's a method of pulling the people who are down economically into economic stability. You get me? That's
Right.
what the goal and the purpose of zakat is. Not just to feed people perpetually while they're poor, right?
Right.
That's not the right.
Yeah.
So when you think about zakat, the way that zakat is that if you are wealthy, right? Because we don't have riba in Islam, we don't have interest in Islam, right? So there's two systems. You have the riba system, the interest system, and then you have the Islamic economic system, right? The way that the riba system works, the interest system works, is that it only benefits people on an individual scale, and it's only beneficial if you're already rich.
Right.
You get me? It
Right.
doesn't benefit you if you are, middle class or under, which the middle class is being completely erased, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the zakat system, what it does, if somebody has economic means, and a time comes for him to pay the zakat now, and say he has $1 million, whatever, right? And he has to pay that 2.5% in zakat money,
Hmm.
right? He's gonna be thinking to himself, okay, I can pay this zakat money, or I can invest it into the community, right? This wealth, right? Now, which one is he more likely to do?
Hmm.
Is he
Yeah.
more likely just to spend that his wealth on zakat, or is he more likely to invest it in the community, thereby bringing up? So either way, the community wins.
Right.
You get me,
Yeah.
right? But there's been no focus on this, right? And as a matter of fact, what the masajid have been becoming, the masajid in the West have been coming like, I keep saying, like the black masajid is turning into the black church.
Yeah.
Or
I agree.
they they just asking for money every single week. Like, how are you not owning your buildings? How are you not owning? I'm just talking. I'm just talking.
Right.
I don't mean to put the masajid out there like that. But there's a disconnect between the imams and the administration in all masajid all over the West, and that's why they're in this issue, right? This problem. But anyways, I just talking. Go ahead, go ahead, Shay.
No, I mean I agree. I think that the church model is so ingrained in us as a social group that we don't
Mm,
realize how much we're replicating it in Islam. So the
mhm.
imam is the preacher.
Yes.
He's the he's the big chief, and
Yeah. Yeah.
his wife is the first lady, and that's incorrect. That is absolutely incorrect.
Mhm.
Um, on the issue of economics, I think that again, though we have it discussed in the books, I think that um, we don't have a our people actually need to be preached to. They need to be encouraged to actually go into business. And I'm not sure that ever
Yes.
was the case before.
Mm,
So for us as students of Al Islam, we have to really research our faith and
mm,
derive guidance for again whatever our specific needs are. Like if we could
mm,
look at Black America and look at what are the main problems of Black America. So I mentioned identity, and that goes into race and all of that. But I would also say it is family and economics.
mm.
Family and economics. Our homes are in shambles. I don't know how it is
Yeah.
in Canada, but I know in the United States, over 70% of our children are born in homes where there's no marriage.
Yes.
Uh, that is, if we were to take those same numbers and say a group of men went off to war and 70% of them got wiped out, that means we lost.
Yes.
In most instances, we lost that war.
Mhm.
Or let's go back to COVID for an example. 70% of the population got COVID. For example, let's say if 70% of Black America caught COVID. I mean, we just, in other words, these are numbers that represent defeat. They represent defeat.
Mhm.
So it's clear then that family life is something that we struggle, that we struggle in. Um, Besides family life, I would say economics. Um,
Mhm.
by 2030, it is the African American community will have zero net wealth. That's
Yes.
what the numbers say.
Mhm.
To today, the average net worth of the average Black family is like, I forget, a couple $100s or something, but the average white family is 100,000. It's some type of huge disparity, and I don't blame structural racism per se. I do not do. I don't. I think that, prior to, and this is sort of common knowledge now with all of these online podcasts and whatnot, and the data is just available. Prior to the late 1960s, we were actually moving upward,
Mhm.
meaning that in terms of oppression, we don't live in a time that's worse than the Jim Crow era.
Mhm.
Reconstruction, Jim Crow. But even during those times, we were better off in terms of keeping our families together and in our economic output. Since the Great Society Act, so the welfare state, etc., our performance has actually gone down.
Mhm.
Um, so
Yeah,
that's
there's a report. It's called the Moynihan Report, written in
Moynihan report.
1968,
Correct.
about that specific issue, right?
Right.
And at that time, right, his name is David Moynihan, if I'm not mistaken,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is a professor in the States somewhere, and he did this whole project for who was the president at that time? I think it was Truman, right? If I'm not mistaken, right? So he did this whole project because the riots just happened, right? And at the no, this is Moynihan or the yeah, just on the Moynihan report. Basically, what he said was that there is pretty much a state of emergency happening in Black America.
Correct.
The single motherhood rates were epidemic and alarming, and at that time it
Right.
was at 25%.
Right.
Right, that's what he was saying. Right now, it's over 70%, and there's a documentary called "There's Disappearing Black Families" that was done in the 80s,
Right.
right?
Right.
Right, and essentially all these black teenagers, and at that time, were saying, "No, we don't need no man in the house," and blah 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 blah.
Correct.
Because what was happening was the government started, monetizing
Correct.
black women to stay in the homes with under the condition that the black man was not in the house.
Right.
You get me? And of course, if you monetize something, you get more of it. And this is what really kind of like spearheaded the disappearing black family. This type of monetization of removing the black man and destroying the black families. And then, of course, after that, you started getting, the war on drugs and massacre,
Correct.
all this other crazy stuff, right? That started happening.
Right.
So what you're saying there in terms of the family dynamics within the black community, it is not something that is organic. Is absolutely socially engineered, right? It is something that is a nefarious project from the U.S. government, right? And not only that, this is what usually happens in the black community as a type of copy and paste model that happens internationally. So if it happens in the states, it's going to happen somewhere else. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
all right, under some other name, right? So you see it
Right.
happening in the global south. You see it happening in Africa now, where they're trying to push LGBTs and all this kind of stuff, right?
Right.
So all of these things are nefarious elements that are being forcibly applied to black folks and monetized in order to get black people to accept it. You
Right.
get it? So anyways, I just talking. I talked way too much. So go
Yeah.
ahead.
So I mean, yeah. I mean, exactly. So I think that once you incentivize bad behavior, people are going to behave in a bad way. That's just the way that tends to be the way it goes. But back to the point of That's a major problem. Family.
Mm.
You can kind of see as a corollary to that the economic performance. I mean, it's known, for example, according to the numbers, that college educated men make more money than non-college educated. College educated couples, college educated married couples in particular, tend to do better economically than the opposite, so on and so forth. So there's some very simple things that we just are missing in Black America. I'm
Yes.
using that data to say, when we do our da'wah and when we begin to educate in Islam, we need to really focus on those issues. So going back to the beginning point about economics,
Mm.
we know our prophet, praise and peace be upon him, a man came to him asking him for sadaqah. And he asked the man, did he have anything of value? And the man had a shirt. And he took the man to the market. Now, mind you, one of the first things our prophet did when he went to Medina was establish an independent marketplace. So he didn't just establish the masjid, he established a marketplace for the Muslims. So these things need to be really looked at for their value in terms of, like you mentioned earlier, of building a people from scratch.
Yes.
And then he took the man to the marketplace, said, would anyone like to trade? Someone had an axe. He traded the shirt or the piece of fabric for an axe. He told the man, go chop some wood, bring the wood back and sell it in the marketplace. So he didn't, in that instance, he didn't give him sadaqah. He
Yeah.
put him in business, actually.
Yep.
So I think some may just look at that and say, well, it's better to go into business than to beg, which is true.
Yes. Yes.
But for us, there's so much more in that, because we are a people who don't have the dignity of ownership. In our neighborhoods, we don't own the stores. We don't own the homes. We don't own anything. So
Yes.
that one hadith and others like it, like he said, no, none of the son of Adam enjoys a meal better than that which he eats from the labor of his own hand. And even the prophet Dawood ate from the labor of his own hands. These hadith, they resonate with us so much more because we live in an environment where the men historically we were property, and we've remained the responsibility of others. So a part of what our dawah and then just our overarching education should be is emphasizing not only the just the teaching, but it's a requirement in our soul. It's a requirement for our psychological well-being as men, and for our women too. But I think our women get pleasure out of seeing us as their man, being in authority and having ownership and leadership over their space that they occupy. That's a need in our soul. And because that need in our soul has not been fulfilled, we are not whole as men. So we marry women with a sense of inferiority. So we're quick to beat on them, curse them out. You see what I'm saying? Because our manhood is not complete. We never saw men growing up. We never saw men around us going out and getting it and teaching us how to go out and get it. So now that connects to another thing. A lot of our women, because they never saw us go out and get it, a lot of our women don't like to admit this. A lot of them in the subconscious regions of their mind, we're not really men. No matter how much they love us, massage us, I love you, black man. It's not even their fault, because we both were brought here together. Yep. At a subconscious, instinctual level. Like imagine being in Africa, just hypothetically, if you can imagine being in Africa with you and your woman. When that white man comes to capture you, or that other African comes to capture you and put you on a boat, her nature knows at the genetic level, she knows you're supposed to be freeing her from this.
Yes.
You're not supposed to be saying, hey, sweetheart, why you're not freeing me?
Yeah, exactly.
She knows you're supposed to be freeing her, protecting her. Well, now we're on the boat. Now she's being raped. Now she's being fondled with. Now she's being sold away. Now she's being impregnated by the slave master in your face. Now, I'm not blaming anybody, but at a subconscious level, we have never been our women's authority.
Yes.
Now, so that means we're extremely deformed as a people. So you going back to
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you, so to,
What?
to what you said about why it's so easy for us to tear leadership down. It's because of this. So I believe that we should be researching our faith to discover that the antidotes to these spiritual needs that we have. So
Mm,
every man should be in the field producing with his own hands or his
yes.
own intellect. If he's an intellectual,
Mm,
that's fine. But all of us as men, we need to be able to look at something that we constructed, be it a book, be it a neighborhood or something, and we should refuse to not have that, to not have ownership of our life. So we need to be drawing on the again what the prophet did, praise and peace be upon him, what's given in the Quran. I mean, even the first man, Adam, Allah created him to be Khalifa. By our natural description, if we tie back into our first father, that's the man that Allah created for responsibility and managing responsibility. So that's how I would reach our people. And then of course family, like I said, economics. I would also say, um, I don't education is a problem for us, but I don't think it would be so much of a problem if we had those first two figured out.
mm.
You see what I'm
Well,
saying?
Sheikh Rashad, right? I keep saying that there's no shortage of work
Mhm.
in the black community. Everybody can do something.
Mhm.
Like literally everybody in the black community right now, we can do something, even if it's small, to help the black
Mhm.
community if we wanted to, right? And there's a leadership problem and a followership problem in
Mhm.
my opinion, and it
Yeah.
only takes a few of us, like what we're doing right now, just to get the ball rolling, so that we can get on code. Even right now, as we're doing this, you'll find that in the black imam sphere, so to speak, there's a
Mhm.
change of tone amongst black imams right now because of the work that we're doing. You get
Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
We're putting it out there, and now even the black imams, they've recognized that yes, we have to do this for our people, and they're starting
Yeah.
to basically deal with black issues now. You
Mm.
get me? So it's just it starts off small, but eventually, it leads to good things, right? And we
Yeah.
shouldn't be afraid to help our own people because every other people helps their own people. If you look at every other people group right now as we speak, they have an economic plan which they've
Mhm.
been practicing for centuries that they learned from Islam directly, all of them,
Mhm.
and that's why they are successful. They have
Right.
strong family ties. They have a code of conduct within their communities. They
Right.
do not tear down their own leadership. They respect all these little small things that the Prophet ﷺ, he expressed
Right.
verbally, and the Sahaba, they actually practice. We
Right.
think we think is small and little, but what we practice, this is what we practice in the black community. You know, I'm standing up for Allah's religion, and that's why I'm refuting you.
Yeah, that's a
That's what we practice,
and it's to
right?
me
So we
it's
practice tearing each other down, but calling it in defense of the Sunnah, right?
yeah, and it's not we don't even see the prophet himself doing it as much. Even when
Yeah, yeah,
Musaylima, the false prophet, wrote him,
yeah.
the prophet responded, from Muhammad, the prophet to the messenger of God to Musaylima the liar.
Yeah.
So again, I do believe that's a problem with black men. I don't hear our women doing that. I think
Mhm.
our women, and I'm not saying this, I'm not tap dancing and playing piano for the sisters.
Yeah.
This has been my real experience. I think women are women. Women, no matter what they say verbally, it's their nature to respond to their men. And I
Mhm.
think that most of our women are waiting on us to be real men. So
Mhm.
I don't hear a lot of sisters talking about, I don't hear a lot of Akita wars, moon sighting wars,
Mhm.
madhab wars. They're not into that.
Yeah.
Most of them, they'll support you if that's the page that you're on, but in the final analysis, they want to know that they're going to be protected,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
they're going to
Well,
have.
with particularly with black women, their issues are really related to, in my opinion, my humble opinion, and Islam, Muslim women are no exception to this rule. They are really kind of do you say? I don't want to say victims, but kind of like it enamored by black feminism and the things that came out of black feminism.
No,
You
I
know,
do agree with
that's
that.
that's their problem. That's their real issue, and they're not seeing the connection between black feminism and the destruction of the black community. Right? They're
No,
not
I do
catching
agree
it.
with that. I do agree
Right?
with that. I think that we have that in our masjids as a huge problem. Um,
Mm,
I'm speaking about just in the terms of the direction. Like I think our women just follow the men, and
mm,
even with the black feminists, one of the
mm,
this is an observation even in the community that I serve, in just the broader
mm,
national community.
mm.
I think they even remain in that mold because a lot of the men permit it.
Yeah, yeah. Because let's face it, black men by and large are widely emasculated,
Correct.
and they have essentially regulated masculinity to physical appearance and sexual performance.
Right.
Right.
So when you look at the Hebrew Israelites, look how their
Mm,
women present themselves online. They have women who
mm,
are open, like we serve our man,
mm.
I'm his 10th wife. So that tells you that, but that's a standard. Now, that community has its problems. I'm not, pointing to
Yeah,
anything as the
yeah.
perfect model, but those
Yeah.
people, if you're going to become a woman Hebrew Israelite, there's a standard that you must conform to. And
Yes.
I think that what we have amongst us, because we're so occupied in this sort of my school versus your school, we haven't really
Mm.
set a standard. What does the black Muslim man look like? What is
Yes.
African American Muslim manhood? What is the agenda of the black Muslim community, which is something that we have to set. We have to
Mm.
set that agenda. And if we as men collectively say, look, this is where we're going, and in light of
Mm.
where we're going, this is the standard that we have for our women.
Mm.
They don't have to even agree. But what we can guarantee is that the women that are with us will be those that agree. Then the feminists
Yes.
have to just be somewhere else. No offense,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying. But even in our masjid, most of the brothers will say, hey, man, that's a little too harsh, man. Calm down. And it's like all you're doing is advocating traditional roles.
Yes.
But anyway, I see you brought somebody on. That's
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
another
So
topic.
before we continue, Fatima with the $10 super chat. May Allah reward you and bless you
I mean,
and multiply it for you a millionfold. I mean, and she says, Assalamu alaikum, Allahumma barak, great discussion. What are some high impact activities that we can implement within ourselves and families and children to build strong leaders for the future? Right. So we'll let brother Rashad answer that question, and then we'll bring on brother C.L. Edwards, inshallah.
so I think that there's some simple activities. I think the first thing that, um, especially women, you sisters are the builders of leaders. Notice how we say Isa ibn Maryam. Notice how Hajar, the story of Hajar, that's the basis of she said for Ismail being saved and the city of Mecca being established. Notice how the story of Musa begins with his mother. So the way it's presented in the Quran and in the tradition, our mothers have a special role in terms of setting the conditions that produce leadership. Um, and I think that that's what you all have to see as your primary role as wives and mothers. That doesn't mean you're limited to just rubbing two stones together to clean socks. That means that your job is to provide an environment that produces the minds and the hearts that will be the future of our communities. In other words, heaven lies at the foot of the mother. In the garden lies at the foot of the mother. And every child that comes from your womb is a comes straight from paradise. That child has no hell. That child has no wickedness. That child has only purity and goodness. And it's your job to cultivate that garden. They're at your feet before you turn them over to us. That is a sacred role. And for you all to execute, first just know that. And then a part of that, the work then, uh, you should be teaching them Quran. You should be teaching them the love of Muhammad the Prophet, praise and peace be upon him. You should be instilling in them a sense of what their sacred duty is for community life, for the life of the community. So they should be learning their first surah or their first chapters of Quran from mother. You should be reading it to them in the morning and before they go to bed. You should be teaching them about our prophet, his traditions. First, about just the moral virtue and proper behavior. Um, and you should be impressing upon them respect for their fathers, respect for their family, respect for their community, and instilling in them a sense of duty. If we could have children growing up in environments like that, you have to keep the television off. If you do have it on, you have to be very selective. You have to be guardians of your garden, guardians of your sanctuary. The music, the social media, you have to be protectors of that, knowing that this environment is designed to deform our children and turn them into something that's non-human, really. Because while we are out working and producing, like I'm not with my family right now, I'm here right now, but I trust that my wife is doing something that's going to situate my sons to one day occupy this role that I'm in, or doing an even greater role. So that's what we need from you all. So I would say, starting with the Quran, starting with reading the seerah of the Prophet, developing in them a love for the Quran, a love for Allah, a love for our Prophet, and a love for their community responsibility. And then that's in general. And then the males, you want to give them certain obligations and responsibilities in the home. For the females, the same. You want to be training your daughters to do your job when you're no longer here. You want to be training the males to do the job of protecting you all and establishing, helping to establish community in the exterior sense. So that's where I would start.
Okay. Oh, we lost brother CL, but we'll
That
wait for him
was
to come back.
legitness. Yeah, it was. Huh?
Wait, oh, he's back. Okay, mashallah, brother CL is back. And also, I just wanted to add to that, Imam Rashad, that uh, when you're raising a child or children, you're not raising the child or children by yourself. You have to raise the child or the children with an entire community, right?
Mm,
Like other people do it. Okay,
right.
so so the people that you expose your children to, that's a part of the raising process. Make sure your children are around righteous people or good people or whatnot. Keep them connected to the masjid, which is very important. Because especially in the black community, there are many distractions and vices and things to take you, here and there. This is something that's by design, anyways, right? So we have to protect our own interest as a community.
That's right.
Okay, brother CL, brother CL, you there?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Alaikum
Wa
salam.
alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh. How you doing, man? You there,
Pretty
CL?
good. It seems like I have a delay.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I can see you. You got a delay. Yeah, make sure your YouTube is off, and let us know what you got for us, Sheikh.
Now, I've just been sitting and listening to you guys speak, and you guys have been saying some really good things, really on point, making some really good effective points. Um, in my estimation, I think culture is extremely important. I think as Muslims in general, black or otherwise, we haven't really realized how important culture is.
Mhm.
Um, I know I've sent you snippets d- of um, of different things that I've put on my channel, taking surveys, and the some of the results of those surveys are kind of disturbing,
Mm,
because I know a lot of the people who responded to those surveys are young, between the ages of 18 and 35. The majority of the viewers on my channel are between 18 and 35. So you got brothers and some sisters who are saying that you know they don't even go to the masjid that very often. Um, They haven't been to they haven't prayed Fajr in the masjid in over a year, or
Mm.
so. There's a really cultural breakdown among American Muslims, not just Black Muslims, but even the immigrants as well. And it's kind of like I would chalk it up to. It seems like there was an idea among all the Muslims that somehow just being Muslim um, made you impervious to the ills of the society going around you. That
Mm.
just simply being Muslim meant that you were, we are different than the kuffar, and what affects. And obviously, that's just not true. You know, um, many Muslim parents believed because they didn't watch certain movies and they didn't listen to music, and they weren't affected by things going on in the culture. Automatically, somehow they believed that their kids weren't going to be affected by these things, and their kids weren't going to watch those movies and TV shows, and their kids weren't going to listen to that music,
Mm.
and that's wrong. We can make it centered right on African American Muslims. You look in every area where there's a concentration of Black Muslims, and you look at the newest generation. The newest generation obviously have been completely affected by what's affected the other Muslim youth. I mean, I'm sorry, the other non-Muslim youth, to the
Right.
point where the cultures are there's no difference between the cultures of a Black youth and a non-Black youth. They dress the same, they talk the same, they behave the same, they engage in the same activities. Um, the only difference is one. Um, even it's another YouTuber who's been going around interviewing Black Muslim youth in different areas, and talking to these youth, talking about how they're involved in the drug trade
Mm.
and in gangs, and even Muslim gangs killing and shooting other Muslim gangs. Um, and I remember one brother from Philly, he said that just because you're Muslim doesn't mean you're not the ops. You can get it
Mm.
too. This is the mentality.
Mhm.
This is the mentality, and I think the sooner sooner we really deal with reality and really are able to open our eyes up and really say what the because when you go to the doctor, the first thing the doctor does is diagnose what the problem is. You can't treat a problem that you refuse really be honest
Mhm.
about what's wrong
Yeah.
in order to come up with a prescription to try to deal with it.
Brother Rashad, what do you got to say about that?
Uh, I agree. I think the culture is the number one problem right now because in America the culture is the dominant influence over our life. We don't it's not the school system. When I say culture, I'm speaking specifically of entertainment culture, though culture has a broader what is it, anthropological definition, but specifically entertainment culture is the biggest influence over our life in this country, and it really sets the standard of practically everything: how we dress, how we talk, what we even find attractive and unattractive. And it does actually seep into those broader regions that incorporate or that encompass the broader definition of culture. It does seep into politics and business, etc. So I think for us, one of the things that we have to do, and this actually does go back to the question about the sisters. This does go back to the homes, because traditionally women, at least for the formative years, they were the transmitters of culture. Um, Before, for example, you turn the boys over to the men and they go through some types of rites of passage, etc. I mean, everyone passes it down, but initially, the mothers pass it down. Obviously, there's an issue if most of our homes are without fathers, so the mothers are not even situated comfortably to really be in that comfortable role of passing down culture, and protecting the sanctuary of the home. So what do we do then? Um, we as men have to extend our arm of responsibility. And I do believe that a big challenge for us is just our wives, and that we do have the responsibility to father, the responsibility of just maintaining a home is we already have so many pressures upon us that it's very hard for us to even consider how are we going to go about the work of now saving even more boys, saving even more families. But I think that that's the challenge. Nevertheless, the group of brothers that I associate with here in Atlanta and across the United States, that's really what our discussion is all about. That's what our interest 100% is. Um, we are now that kind of goes into another direction though, and I don't know if we're going to talk about that today. Like for example, I have a close friend. He just took on another wife, um, but it's connected to this reason. It's connected to this reason. Um, Another close friend of mine is currently looking for another wife, um, connected to this reason. So, like I said, that may take us in another direction, and that's one way.
Now, in terms of black culture, what we see as black culture as well is not actually black culture. It's something that is kind of that's like a Frankenstein mishmash of what the enemy has been putting in front of us so that we can perceive this culture as black culture as they do. Okay,
Mhm.
as they do, right? So recently there was a big thing, you probably seen it on the news, about Beyonce and country music, and she made a country song and whatnot. Yeah, have you seen
Yeah,
this?
yeah,
Right, right. So, and it was a big stink online, and essentially what it was is that how can she be doing country music? Well, who are the original inventors of country music?
right,
It's black folk, right?
right,
We're the ones who invented country music, as we did rock and roll, as we did as culturally. All these things come from us, right?
right,
Culturally, right? But again, the enemy, what they do is that they come and they infiltrate it, they take it over, you know what I'm saying?
mm,
They commandeered it. Same thing with hip hop. Hip hop started as a if you're old enough, you remember that hip hop started as a
mm,
grassroots type of music that came out of the South Bronx, right? And it kind of blew up right within urban centers all around the West, or particularly United States, and then eventually throughout the West. And if you guys remember, if you're old enough to remember, they were calling hip hop what? A passing fad,
right,
something that will end. That's what this one lighter is saying. This stuff, right? They're saying it will end eventually. It will end eventually. And what was it? What was it in the beginning? It was the voice of inner city youth
mm-hmm,
who are basically telling their experience of the inner city. And in the early days of hip hop, it was don't give me that no crack, and and staying off drugs and all this kind of stuff.
right,
It was all this kind of stuff, right? And
right,
even a lot of people first heard about Islam through hip hop music.
right,
You know, when they started listening to folks like Public Enemy and whatnot, and that this is their first exposure to, you know, Islam and stuff like that, right? So, but anyways, what happened? The enemy came, commandeered it, and then we
right,
saw in the mid '90s the rise of gangster rap,
right,
right? And now from gangster rap, it went to being the drug dealer. It went from staying
mm,
off the drugs to being the drug dealer. And in
mm-hmm.
2024, it's about doing the drugs, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Being the drug addict,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
popping pillies and all this kind of stuff. All this stuff is not organic. No other people on earth, basically stands on the destruction of their own community and coming up with the most demeaning, degrading language in order to perpetuate themselves, right? No other community does that except for black people because it's not organic. So when Islam was spreading, particularly in the '90s, if you're old enough to remember, it was reforming a lot of these social ills, like en masse. You know what I mean? It was really making a massive difference, within the, particularly in the 90s. And what happened again, as the enemy does, all right, in my
Mm.
humble opinion, all right, the enemy came and changed the narrative, right, from basically staying away from drugs and for the sake of Allah, staying with one wife and keeping your it changed the narrative into this one's a deviant, that one's a deviant, this one's a deviant. So now we have this whole generation of this one's a deviant, that one's a deviant, who sent their kids to these schools, who grew up with what? They're competing with hip hop culture. You get me? Now, if you look at a lot of the street people, right? People who are on the street, right? Why did they decide to avoid getting like jobs and staying away from the church in order to embrace street life? What was the appeal? Right? The appeal was what? Economics,
Hmm.
right? The appeal was that you could make a lot of money in a little bit of time, right? And if you have like 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds making $1,000 or $2,000 in a day, right? What is going to be incentive for you going to seek a minimum wage job, right? You get me?
Right.
So now, if you're a Muslim, how does this negate that reality? Unless you bring something else, unless you bring an alternative to that reality. And refutation culture is not that. Okay,
Yeah.
refutation. That's what we have been inundated with, and now the Muslim cemeteries are being filled with Muslim children who grew up in the modern hip hop culture era. You get me? So go ahead, brother Rashad or brother CL, if you want to jump in there.
Yeah. It sounded like Brother CL wanted to add on.
Yeah, I think you want. Yeah, brother CL, brother CL. Okay, brother Rashad, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead if you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, that's exactly what happened with the youth. While in many of the black masjids, people were, doing all this refutation and warning and um, endless, Akida is very important, but you know, the
What's going on in the
this
street?
hyper
Is
focus
are
on
they fighting on the
Akida,
streets
many
for
of the youth
Akida, or are they
just,
fighting on the streets for territory and money? And you know, these are you see this happening in your
well,
face,
yeah,
and
that's
you
exactly, yeah.
yeah, no accountability. Anyways, I'm sorry to cut you off there, CL. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the kids just tuned all that stuff out. The
Mhm.
kids just like they just tuned all that stuff out and went to the streets.
Yeah.
There was nothing in it that was relevant. Think about if you were a young man, what would be relative? What would be relevant about that? How does that help you? What does that? How does that help you transition from a boy into a man? How does that help
Mhm.
you? You're looking at you're living in a neighborhood. You're looking at your parents who are Muslim, and they're poor and struggling, and you look at other people on your block who aren't Muslim and they're poor and struggling. What difference does it make?
Mhm.
It doesn't do anything. It doesn't make any difference. So I might as well go ahead and do my own thing. Well, I might as well go to the people who are actually getting some money and actually building something and accomplishing something. At least from my teenage brain. You know. So even I heard you guys talking about Muslims and entrepreneurship. Every area is different, but from what I remember, back in the 80s and 90s, the Muslims had a reputation of being entrepreneurs. Like I
Yep.
remember
That's
being as a
a fact.
kid in Detroit,
That's a
anytime
fact.
you saw
Yep.
black men, even time every time you saw black men, rehabbing a house to flip it or to rent it out, it was Muslims. When you saw people who were doing vending on the streets or in different areas, it was Muslim. Opening up shops, it was Muslims. I don't know what something happened after the 90s. Something just switched up and happened where the whole entire mentality dialogue changed. I think part of that has to do with the war on drugs and mass incarceration, where black men were being ushered into the prison system and being introduced to Islam in the prison system and coming out, and that new generation replaced the previous generation,
Mm.
and you know brothers didn't have infrastructure. Brothers didn't have that entrepreneurial spirit, but they did have a spirit to disagree and fight with each other. I know that. um that I'm just speculating on that, but that's just where my mind went.
Brother Rashad?
Yeah, I agree. I think that these have there have been concentrated efforts to see to it that every time our people, this is blacks in general, but what we're talking about now is really the African American circumstance. Every time we've jutted forward in some type of positive direction, there seems to always be something to pull us back. Um, and I think that that's what we have, because I agree. I think that the black Muslim was known as the productive black person. We have a reputation of that. We stuck with our families. We had good kids in the homes. We had we were we gave a hard day's work, so on and so forth, and that changed in a lot of places. So um, I mean, this gets into conspiracy theory to me, because for me, I should say, because I actually believe that um, there was a deal made to teach a certain type of Islam, to abort the direction that we were already going in. I actually believe that, and I actually believe now. Sometimes you can wound up a clock and just let it go. So even what you talked about regarding the we have a new culture of refutation,
Yes.
but really it's really in response to the old code. Most of those guys that are involved in that, they're 50, they're late 40s, in their early 50s, so they're from the time when that old culture, it's a response. So I really think that this is like a what do you call it, you let the
Swing, a
thing
pendulum.
pendulum. It's a pendulum
Yeah.
effect, and it's really designed to tie up all of our energies. So I don't really criticize those brothers who I see engaged in that. I don't criticize them because I know where it's coming from. Well, I think I have a good idea where it's coming from. They're busy trying to fight off what was put upon them, and their lives were, the people around them, things were put in shambles, and they see the negative effects of that first wave of the refutation culture. So we have to really look at what has happened, and I yeah. So I think brother CL began with this. You have to just properly analyze the symptoms. You have to give a proper diagnosis of what you're really dealing with in order to deal with it. And that seems to be what shows like this are doing, and I think we just have to do more of it to make more of our people consciously aware. Because I don't think, human beings are essentially good. That's our belief in Islam. Human beings are essentially good. We just have to be, through platforms such as this, made aware of those things that are working against our best interest. And if we can, then we can do the work to preserve or protect ourselves from whatever it is that's working against our goodness. I think that what we have working for us today is, I mean, again, not to beat a dead horse, but we didn't have social media before. We didn't have the wherewithal to be connected with one another, cross nationally, cross communally, even. But we do. So we have to just be, I think, a little bit more intentional about uh, putting ourselves as a community on notice against these things that work against us.
Brother CL, you have any last words before we close it out? Brother CL?
Yeah, I was going to add on to what the brother just said, and yeah, I was going to add on to what the brother just said, and one thing I do notice about the older generation of Black Muslims is that they did come out of a structured environment, of the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad, and many of them came out of the Black Liberation Movement. So I think they brought that along with them, which gave them a discipline and a structure while being Muslims that that the later generation lacked, because the later generation that comes in the late 90s, the 2000s, and onwards, they obviously didn't come out of that, but they came out. A lot of brothers came out of just the neighborhood and had just discovered Islam, or discovered Islam while being incarcerated, and it that lack of structure and that lack of discipline contributed to a lot of the results that we have seen.
Hmm.
Brother Rashad, closing thoughts in response to Brother CL?
Oh no, I think that that's a good way to end it. I agree. I think that yeah, I think that what was said is sufficient. We just have to be aware of we're evolving, you know, and I think that a part of that is that we have to always assess and reassess our condition. Um, and we need to make a stronger call for conscious men and women to join us in this broader work. Our channel, like going back to our YouTube channel, is relatively young, you know, um, and I really didn't start making a consistent videos till the new year. But one of the aims that we have, we really would like to, just like you know, we want to be even more aggressive than the Nation of Islam and more aggressive than the Hebrew Israelites in calling our people to the religion and presenting a clear picture of the religion for the benefit of our communities. So I commend you for your work, and the others that are doing this great work. And you know, I really pray Allah for all of our success.
Brother Rashad, we really, really, really appreciate your time.
Alhamdulillah.
You blessed us a lot, and you given us over 2 hours of your precious time, and that may Allah reward you and bless you so
Ameen.
much for that. And we really appreciate it. You went live, you answered questions, and I hope we can do it again,
Yeah,
inshallah, if you don't
inshallah.
mind.
Yes, sir.
Right? For those
Yeah.
of you who don't know, this is Imam Rashad Abdul-Rahman. Check him out on his channel under his name, and as well as the young brother who asked you questions. He
Mhm.
has a business as well. What is it?
His business is We Buy Black. It's the largest online marketplace for black owned businesses. Check out We Buy Black on Instagram. Follow their Instagram page.
Right, Jazakumullah khair. May Allah reward you. I want
Mm.
to ask Allah to bless everybody who joined us today. I want to
Ameen.
ask Allah to bless particularly our donors here today who helped us out. Sister Fatima, may Allah
Mm.
reward you and bless you and multiply it for you a millionfold. And who else we got? We got Brother Bilal. May Allah reward you and bless you, multiply it for you a
Ameen.
millionfold with a £10 super chat. And of course, Sister Tika, big supporter. Allah reward you and bless you, multiply it for you a millionfold. Like, subscribe, share, family. Check out brother Rashad Rahman on his channel. His channel is growing exponentially. MashaAllah, he's doing great, great, great work. Right?
Alhamdulillah.
He's not dusty like me. Okay, he's like really professional. Okay, so all
Alhamdulillah.
right. And we'll see you guys next time. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam.